40 years ago, our national bird was in decline. Where eagles once perched and dove into the water to catch fish, their giant empty nests were seen around the West. Most of these birds weren't dying off naturally. They were being killed by pesticides, including thallium sulfate, sodium monofluoroacetate, DDT, and many other pesticides, otherwise known as poisons used to kill predators. Right around this time, Nixon was president and the U.S. was suffering its worst economic decade since the Great Depression. Nixon saw that showing his concern for environmental issues would help improve his public image. Events during this time helped push the president to enact a number of wide-reaching environmental regulations. An essential event that helped lead to the banning of many toxic chemicals occurred on May 1st, 1971. It started inauspiciously when two 18-year-old men decided to go hiking up Jackson Canyon, 10 miles southwest of Casper, Wyoming. The canyon was famous for its prime eagle habitat, but it would be no ordinary day of bird watching. Several miles up the canyon, in a stream bed, the boys came upon an eagle carcass washed there by spring runoff. They walked a few more yards and came upon another carcass. That day, they found 7 dead eagles. Soon word of the eagles reached the Muri Audubon Society in Casper, which led to additional searches in and around the canyon. In all, 22 dead eagles were found. The total number included 11 bald eagles and 11 golden eagles. In order to preserve their evidentiary value, they were stored in a freezer belonging to Bart Ray, a geologist and local Audubon member.
Then the question is, what do we do with them? Well, my wife and I had just bought a brand new freezer from Sears Roebuck. And there wasn't anything in it yet. We'd just gotten it that week.
Yeah.
So we were elected to bag up the eagles in garbage bags and put them in our freezer till we could get somebody to come and examine them. There was some evidence that the state government wanted to hush this whole thing up because it was obvious that probably a rancher was involved in poisoning the eagles. And state administration at that time was good friends with the ranchers, which is okay, but didn't want to get them antagonized. So that's why we kept them hidden for the feds.
Yeah.
The freezer had a lock on it, so we locked the freezer, and I kept the key in my pocket so that if anybody came to my wife and said, "Let us in that freezer," she could say, "I can't, I don't have the key."
Yeah.
So eventually the head enforcement officer for the whole Fish and Wildlife Service from Washington showed up at our front door. It was a couple of days later with a couple of biologists with him. He said, "I've come for the eagles."
The reason for the eagles' deaths was soon found. They had been killed by a pesticide called thallium sulfate, most likely planted by ranchers in and around Casper to kill predators that they believed were harming their livestock. Pesticides are most often used by taking a sheep carcass and lacing the chemicals within the body. Predators eating the carcass become poisoned. These events brought awareness up and got the attention of scientists, including Jackson Hole resident Franz Commonson.
I think what came to light in the Jackson Canyon situation in central Wyoming was deplorable. It's just inexcusable, in my mind, criminal, and actually it was followed through with criminal cases. So it was an embarrassment, but I think it was not that atypical in the West. I think things like that were happening for a long time and in a lot of places, and this is just the one that came to light.
This and many ongoing events in the West led scientists to look more in depth into the impacts of predator control.
I started doing my coyote research here in Jackson, and predator control in Wyoming became an issue, and certainly became of interest to me. In 1080 was the predator, or the poison of choice at the time, and I started to pick up an interest in that. Not that it was occurring here in Jackson, but in the rest of the state.
Around 1970, ranchers were killing a higher percentage of eagles than coyotes because they were convinced that eagles were preying on more of their sheep and livestock than coyotes. Evidence shows that coyotes take many more lambs than eagles. Eagles prey mostly on fish and small rodents, so they would not have reason to resort to killing lambs.
Well, the more work I did with coyotes, the more I realized that trying to control them was really a ridiculous effort because they have such an ability to reproduce and to fill up the environment. And then when you start looking at poisons like 1080, they were so nonspecific that you realized that they were causing a lot of problems in the environment. So for two reasons. One, predator control just didn't make sense to me, and poisons were having an extended impact on the environment.
Along with killing animals, these poisons can kill humans. It was estimated that 1 teaspoon of sodium fluoroacetate could kill over 100 people. In total, 4 people intentionally killed themselves using pesticides, and another 12 died from unintentional poisoning. Along with their toxicity, many of the chemicals don't get broken down by an animal's digestive system. This means that when these dead animals are eaten by other predators, those predators are also poisoned. The chemicals are highly transferable. In reaction to the events in Jackson Canyon, many people started to pay more attention toward the killing of eagles. There were many cases found in Wyoming about the shooting of eagles from helicopters, and mass grave sites where up to 60 eagles were found buried. When eagles were shot from helicopters, they were usually left where they fell. In total, 50 dead eagles were found around Casper that had been poisoned by pesticides. Hundreds of eagles were shot from helicopters, and the total bald and golden eagle deaths in Wyoming amounted to more than 700. Eagles were not the only animals affected, and there was more than one way of administering these poisons.
I've come across a number of cases where I found coyotes that had been killed by coyote gidders, or M44s, which are these devices placed in the ground, scented, and a coyote comes along, smells that wick, the scented wick, pulls it, and initially it would discharge, or it was discharged by a cartridge shell, and then the cyanide was thrown into the mouth. They changed that from a shell to a spring-loaded, so that the shell itself sometimes was killing animals, but the spring-loaded did the same thing. It put the cyanide. I came across a number of cases like that. I've come across here in Wyoming helicopters out gunning coyotes, and have a lot of pictures of the truck full of coyotes, and helicopters landing with coyotes on their skids and so forth. So I personally seen a lot of the impacts of predator control, particularly coyote control. Well, I think unfortunately Wyoming can take a place in the center stage here for some of the worst reasons, because we had incidences of serious poisoning, particularly of raptors, golden eagles, and bald eagles, and so forth. And that became a national news item, and that then I think really brought this whole predator control, and certainly the use of poisons, to a forefront. I think it brought it to the White House, and I think quite clearly part of the very bad activities here in Wyoming did result in some good outcomes.
Through the hard work of many people and organizations, including the Sierra Club and Rachel Carson with her book Silent Spring, these events finally came to President Nixon's attention. The bald eagle as an iconic figure forced Nixon to react. Just 9 months later, in February of 1972, Nixon passed the bill banning the use of pesticides and DDT, as they were the prime contributors to eagle deaths. Along with the banning of these chemicals, the Endangered Species Act was ratified in July of 1973, further protecting our national bird. Even though these chemicals were banned, it seems it was not the end of their use. In early 2012, there were multiple bald eagles found dead in Idaho. There were a few dead eagles found, and along with the dead, there was one who survived. This eagle went to rehab at the Teton Raptor Center in Wilson, Wyoming. This eagle appeared to be poisoned, but the true cause has yet to be found. These events were all very important to the survival of the bald eagle. As Franz Commonsen said, the very bad activities in Wyoming did result in some good outcomes. At the all-time low, there were just over 400 nesting pairs of bald eagles in the U.S. Even though eagles are still being targeted by unscrupulous means, our bald eagle population has grown successfully to nearly 10,000 nesting pairs. This is due to the banning of these horrific toxic chemicals.